Guess what? You're listening to the In the Can Show every Wednesday, only on inthecan.net.
I was not aware of that.
Get the latest in film reviews from inthecan.net, preventing mind vomits by recommending only the best. Alright, and today we're talking to Stephen about Godzilla, the king of the monsters. What did you have to say about Godzilla? Was it what you'd imagined, what you'd expected? Did it live up to your dreams of a Godzilla movie?
It's kind of, I didn't really have much expectations going into the film, really, to be honest. In the build-up, there was quite a bit of hype. I think with a few of the images that came up and a little bit of early footage in the trailer, that's when things started to pick up because people saw, okay, they're taking themselves seriously. So it looks like a genuine film that we can maybe get behind. But I think overall there wasn't really much going for it in terms of like delivering some surprises or something.
Did you find it to be a little bit too serious? I always thought that Godzilla would take the kind of cheesy...
Yeah, one of the notes I took was that there wasn't actually any humor in the film at all.
No,
I don't recall anything.
It wasn't funny at all. Not at all.
Yeah, there was a moment when one of the characters was laughing, and that was about it.
I think that when I went into the cinema, it's like everybody was laughing when Ken Watanabe was saying Gojira. And that's about the only time that anybody laughed, and I don't think that was intended to be funny in the first place.
Yeah.
So, when I walked before I walked into the cinema, I told all of the critics around me, I said, this is either going to be the worst Godzilla that we've ever seen, or it's going to be the best one. And in the end, it sort of turned out to be a very okay-ish Godzilla movie.
Yeah, it's almost like neither.
Yeah, it wasn't
because you're not really sure what is the definitive Godzilla. This is probably closer than the 1998 version, but by rights, we should have had this film in 1998. Maybe a few humorous little anecdotes here and there to lighten it up a bit.
Well, if you think about the 98 Godzilla, it wasn't really Godzilla. I think that the Japanese even made a movie where the real Godzilla destroyed the American Godzilla. So, they've already distanced themselves from that. I mean, look, I watched that one in the cinema, and I didn't like it back then. I still don't like it. I think that for its sheer entertainment factor, it's up there. It's got all the big explosions that you expect from Roland Emmerich, but...
It's almost like a buddy cop disaster movie where John Reno and Matthew Broderick are kind of like the main guys, and they have these funny moments between them. Yeah, but that's about it, really.
They're not like Matthew Broderick's just not the guy you expect to be the guy that's sort of heading up this Destroy Godzilla campaign. And I think that was the problem that I had with this Godzilla as well, is that the humans were just kind of irritating, it's like they just didn't have any personality. Like, I think Aaron Taylor Johnson was just the worst. I don't think I've seen him in anything.
He had like no personality throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, I know, and that's one of the big problems I had, and it's really disappointing because it's like when the movie starts off, it's like they have this sort of like, tangible sort of tension, it's like you can feel it. Yeah. And it just loses that, it just loses it along the way.
Yeah, for me, I think the movie lost quite a bit of momentum when, and this is a spoiler, just to for those people that intend to watch it, when Bryan Cranston actually died.
Yeah, I also found that. And he was a strange character anyway. I mean, he was the best character by far that they had in there.
Yeah.
Like, the most convincing character.
True.
But it's like, when he died, it's like, it seemed almost like his purpose in the film was redundant. It's like...
Yeah, in fact, it actually rendered all of the human aspects redundant. Because here you had a human that you actually invested in, the character, but then he dies. So you sort of, all that emotional investment that's built up, you sort of have to kind of transfer it over to his son, and it doesn't really relate because his son is sort of going off on his own thing, and he's also emotionless.
Yeah, he's like a plank, it's like he just doesn't have any personality at all. And it's like, even in terms of what Bryan Cranston's character, he was a researcher, and he actually had quite a bit of research, and they spent a significant portion of the first act going into What is the power plant called? The Nunjiri
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
plant, looking for his research, and they never ended up using his research.
it was pointless. Yeah,
So
and
it
then
just was a bit of a slap in
yeah,
the face, you know.
as I mentioned in my review, they basically robbed us also of the Ken Watanabe, Bryan Cranston sharing a scene together because they basically sort of arrest him and hold him, but there's no real point to any of it because they don't use his research as you mentioned. And, at the end of the day, the humans can't really do anything about these monsters. They just got to stand by and watch.
Um, I also found that the film was like it was just seemed very confused. You know, it's like did it
Mm.
want to approach the human aspects of the movie, or did it want giant monsters beating the crap out of each other? It's like
Yeah.
personally, I think they would have benefited more if they didn't leave the giant monster beat down up until like the second last act or the third act, I should say. It's like they really kept you going there, and
Yeah, that second act, I felt like well, I was sitting in the cinema and I was actually waiting, checking my watch, and I was thinking, we know where this is going. Can we just move it along? Because some of those plot points in the center of that film was actually kind of really confusing and silly. Some of the decisions that the characters made, I mean, really, that whole nuclear plot with
I
the
know it
bombs.
was completely ridiculous. I didn't even know what they were thinking of there, and it's a shame because even though nobody really was looking forward to a Godzilla movie, I mean, we didn't actually expect this sort of Godzilla movie to ever happen again. It's
Yeah,
like
true.
they didn't really take a sort of like pleasing route. And
Mhm.
in terms of the actual monster stuff itself, I thought it was pretty good. I mean, it doesn't hold a candle to Pacific Rim, which I think was a better
Yeah,
Godzilla movie than this was. I mean, Pacific Rim was awesome, but
yeah. Yeah,
it's
what I mentioned also was that we've been overexposed to this sort of thing. Like Pacific Rim was last year, so it's like fresh in the minds of people, and they're going into another disaster movie, so the onus is on them to kind of surprise us. But it doesn't really have anything going for it in that department. And yeah, I mean, yes, the monsters were cool to look at, and they're beating each other up and whatever. But we kind of have seen this already, so it does
and
fall
it's
a
been
little
done
flat.
better. It's
Yeah,
we've
true.
seen it before, and it's been done better. And to be honest, I didn't actually expect this movie to be anything much. I mean, it's like Godzilla is so sort of entrenched in cinema history and like the 50s kaiju movies of Japan. Not that I'm
Yeah.
saying that I'm much of a fan, but it's like it's had its time and place. It doesn't really
Yeah.
seem to fit in our current
Needed an
cinema
update.
landscape.
But also, I mentioned also to Terrence today, actually, that Guillermo del Toro actually mentioned in passing that they could actually do a crossover with Pacific Rim. And then those notions were quashed as soon as he made the comment. But it would have actually been very cool if they'd had like right at the end of Godzilla, they'd had a little sequence where the governments are getting together and talking about what are we going to do if this ever happens again. And then they sort of pool their funds, and it sort of like begins to look like a prequel to Pacific Rim and how Pacific Rim came about when they decided, okay, we're going to make giant robots. But obviously that never happened.
I think from like a visual point of view, it was a really sort of nice movie to look at, and I think that the debut of Fat Godzilla, as what the Japanese are terming him, I think that's a little bit of an overestimation, considering that the original Godzilla was just a man in a really sort of cumbersome suit. But
Yeah.
I thought that he was faithful. I think that when he released his roar, it actually sent goosebumps down because it was like we finally hearing Godzilla
Yeah.
roar like in America in an American cinema,
Yeah, that
and
was awesome.
that was cool. And the nuclear breath was awesome. I mean, they like
But
really.
the one thing I couldn't understand with the nuclear breath, why didn't he use that in the beginning? I mean, why did he wait so long? And then all of a sudden, in the climax, we thought he was dead. He gets up, and then all of a sudden, boom, he uses the nuclear breath, and the fight is almost over pretty much quite quickly.
Well,
But I mean, it was almost like a convenient little, oh, we have this secret weapon that we will now use.
yeah,
Uh,
that is true. Why it's like the sword from Pacific Rim. It's like the most
yeah,
powerful
true.
weapon, but they save it for the very end. So, but that's a signature move, and it's that's really what I attribute like Godzilla to being is like a glorified wrestling match, really.
Yeah. I think there was quite a few holes in the plot though that were quite confusing. I mean, we mentioned the nuclear bomb, but I was wondering why on earth did they swim across the whole of the Pacific to go and lay a nest in San Francisco?
Well, it has to take place in America, obviously.
Yeah, and then also it has to take place in a city, but it has absolutely no real motivation to go there. I mean, Japan has like six nuclear sites, nuclear power stations, and they need nuclear, right? So that's what they feed on. But why didn't they just go to the different sites in Japan?
You're
Seeing as they were
expecting
there
some
already.
form of logic in a Godzilla movie. That's your
Well,
problem, is that you're expecting more.
They sort of segued into this, right? In the first half hour, they were trying to convince us that they were taking themselves seriously. So, hence, I was thinking a little bit of logic was sort of involved in this process, but clearly I was wrong.
No, well, I didn't expect any logic, to be honest. I mean, and they proved me right. That's when my expectations were met, that it was completely illogical. The one thing that I really didn't like, though, like in terms of the logic aspect, is that I don't really buy Godzilla's backstory. It's like a prehistoric beast that apparently nobody has seen, you know.
Yeah.
And then
And
all
then
of a
what
sudden
does
he
he
just
do?
shows up, you know.
And what does he do every 100 years? He decides, okay, time to go topside.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. Neither do the Muto beasts. They also
Yeah.
they also don't really make all that much sense.
Yeah,
And
their origins weren't actually that well explained, in my opinion.
that was an aspect of the film that displeased me, because it's like, you know, nowadays everybody in Hollywood thinks that they have to make, like, you know, a legitimate sort of like scientific reference to their monsters and science fiction, instead of
Yeah.
just leaving it be. Either explain it or don't explain it. That's how I feel, and
Yeah.
that's, I think, in general, the whole film just left a lot to be desired. Obviously, it is better. I felt it at least to be better than the last attempt, which, you know, I think anything could have been better than that, to be honest. It's but
Yeah, but again, it comes down to that old destruction porn thing that we've mentioned before, um, in jest. But it's like every movie needs to now take place in a city. I was thinking, why don't it just be different and take it out to a field or a desert or somewhere? But of course, it wouldn't really please anyone in Hollywood.
I found the most hilarious thing to actually be the sort of running billboard that they had at the end of the film that said, like, "King of the
Yeah.
Monsters saves the city."
That
And
was,
it's like,
I think all of our critics were having a laugh at that one. That was probably the most laugh, the biggest laugh we had in the whole film was that.
I mean, the thing is that they're actually trying to explain that, like, this monster is like a conscience, and he was actually trying to do it to save the city, and they played it out like that. But in the end, it's a monster, and
Did it just forget that we actually tried to kill it? That we were firing rockets at it left, right, and center.
well,
When it
maybe
came
it's got Godzilla's got a really big heart, you know that.
Yeah, and a short memory. Maybe one of those rockets landed on his head and a little memory loss.
So, any hopes for a sequel? You think that there will be one? You think it'll make enough money?
Well, with Hollywood, you never know. I mean, it may make enough money because of the demographic. People can watch it. Anybody can take the child to go see it. It depends. Or, you know, in a couple of months' time, we'll see. But I don't really see a sequel for this.
Well, let's just humor me for a moment. Let's just say that there were to be a sequel. What would your monster be that you'd want to put into there? Would you like to see another original monster like this one with the Mutos? Or would you like to see, you know, Mothra, Ghidorah, any of those ones?
To be honest, I'm not actually that clued up on the Godzilla mythos in the history and kaiju history, but like I said, I wasn't actually into this film when I first heard it. I've never been a major Godzilla fan, so yeah, it's kind of like, you know, you wishing for a second-rate Pacific Rim that's going to come out.
Yeah,
I'd rather watch a Pacific Rim sequel.
Yeah. Just throw the money from any potential Godzilla sequel into a Pacific Rim sequel, please.
Exactly, yeah.
That's all. And you know, just make it just as silly as it was before. Let's just call this Pacific Rim 2 podcast, because that's what we're interested in.
at least the humans had a point in Pacific Rim, you know. At least they were actually involved in the mechanics of the story.
The thing is that that film, it's like as silly as it was, as ridiculous as it was, it had like sort of, it had a vocabulary to it. You know, it's like you knew who the characters were. That sure they were sort of like cartoonish cutouts, but
Yeah.
the whole film was like that. So you know, you didn't really have much to lean on. You didn't really expect anything really, like you know.
Yeah, your expectations were pretty well met in that film.
Yeah, it was just it was just Rock'em Sock'em Robots. That's all that you had to watch. But it's like Godzilla. I don't know if they were taking the artistic sort of route with this one, but I think that
I think
it it didn't
I think
please either side.
at the very least, I think that it did right by illustrating Godzilla in the way that it should be,
Yes. So
so
it's
that
like the
to
sins
satisfy
of
the
the
fanboys.
fathers have been repented for.
Yeah, it just came a bit like 12 years too late.
Yeah,
Well,
I'll agree with you there. It's I think one thing that they should have addressed is that they didn't really please either sides. They didn't please the people that were looking for sort of a more sort of gritty, realistic Godzilla, and they didn't please the people that were looking for, you know, Godzilla destroy all monsters. You know, it just kind of went somewhere in the middle, and it didn't really satisfy either. That's
yeah,
really the bottom line, to be honest.
I'm just trying to wonder who conceived this idea, who convinced the producers to say this is a good idea, we should make this film.
Well,
But
the
yeah,
as far as I know, the writer has had the writer of Godzilla himself has had very a very active career with such gems as The Expendables and
mm.
Doom. So
But the director guy, he's like, I think this is his first major feature film, if
indeed, it
I'm correct.
is. I
Yeah.
don't think he's really done anything before that, and this is really sort of a year for newcomers. So I think that
Yeah, in that regard, it's actually a pretty good piece of work. I mean, for your first major film,
well,
in terms of the visuals and the special effects, it was quite an achievement. But yeah, you kind of needed that extra gravity. It Godzilla for the film that it is, it needed more than that.
Well, it just shows that, you know, a budget can buy you a lot. You know, it can't buy you a good movie, but it can buy you a pretty movie. It can buy you expensive actors. I watched, and all fans, you can read this on the site. Uh, what's it? Last Days on Mars. Also, new director, very small budget, terrible movie. And he probably won't direct anything ever again. And
Yeah.
I mentioned that it was like Mission to Mars, which
Mhm.
was also brand new director. I don't remember his name, and that was a flop as well. So this
Well,
guy, I'm sure that at least because of the name Godzilla, he will make money. His career is not over yet.
well, Hollywood has this habit of also doing the inverse and then taking a sort of established brand and then tossing in a talented director that hasn't yet hit the big time in terms of like I'm thinking of Ang Lee with the Hulk. Then they took Gavin Hood and put him in with Wolverine. And they have this whenever they have a foreign film director that maybe wins some awards, they throw him into a blockbuster to see what'll happen. They did the same thing. I forget his name now. The director of RoboCop, who I think he did the Elite Squad.
Oh yes,
So,
Jose Padilla,
yeah,
and
and so they have this trend of doing this with foreign directors as well.
and I really can't stand that either. I mean, I think Jose Padilla made Elite Squad was actually pretty good,
Yeah.
from what I remember. I mean, it was pretty dark and gruesome, but it's like the RoboCop disappointed, you know, just the same way that Godzilla disappoints. But I think for the mass audiences, they'll probably walk away at least satisfied with the Godzilla. You know, if anything, it's got the action.
Yeah, we've actually mentioned this again with Terrence. I was mentioning again, and we were saying that audiences seem to be okay with this. You know, they go into the cinema and it's a big budget movie. As long as they get an eyeful, and they'll walk out and then maybe go have some McDonald's or something.
Well, I think that everybody got an eyeful. It's just was too late in the movie. You know, I would have
Yeah.
I would have just preferred it if they had just had the smackdown laid there right from the beginning. You know, I think that if they'd taken the Pacific Rim approach, Godzilla would have been. It might not have been a classic, but I think everybody would have been like, "Wow, you know, let's make another one of these." But
Yeah. But then it's like that whole King Kong aspect as well, where you have these iconic characters and you want to reboot them, but the audience kind of knows the story, and there's not much story there. But
well,
but
you're not really expecting fantastic stories from Godzilla. We know what. Even if you haven't watched a Godzilla movie, you know what Godzilla movies are about.
yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to. When I was writing the plot of the film for my review, I was like, do I really need to do this? Because people know what they're gonna. People really know what the plot is. I mean, it's a big monster. It comes out of the ocean.
Well, if anything, I could have just made the suggestion that they should have toned down the human aspect. You know, it's like really. I've watched a couple of Godzilla movies, and the human aspect has never really been there. You know, it's and they did really humanize Godzilla himself quite a bit. That's the thing. It's like they made him
Yeah.
sympathetic, and I think the last thing on Godzilla's mind is sympathy. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, they tried to put the audience on his side again, try and make him the star of the film,
Yeah,
which
well,
he kind of was, but yeah, the
well,
film
as
wasn't as
opposed
big.
to the '98 Godzilla, where Godzilla was definitely the villain.
Yeah, true.
Actually, I stand corrected. I think that the U.S. Army did more damage to New York than Godzilla did. So, yeah, I think that's for sure. Uh, anyway, I think that we're just about out of time.
Well, we were preparing a few pieces on X-Men coming up, so that's the next major film, which is next week, and then we'll be going on radio as well. Two Oceans Radio, you can look out for that. That's all really from me.
Yeah, thanks all the fans that are listening to our podcast. We're in episode 2 now of the In the Can show. Next week you'll be in a treat. Steven, Terrence, and myself, we're all going to be talking about X-Men. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And as always, follow, like, subscribe, all of that delicious stuff. Thank you, Steven, for joining us in the podcast. And
Well, thanks for having me.
as always, stay tuned.